Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we are tackling another historical topic related to the video game Kingdom Come Deliverance, both 1 and 2 actually. And that topic is how mischaracterized Sigismund of Luxembourg is in these games. Now before we actually get into all of that, I have a few things to say. First, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel if you're a fan of these games, as I regularly make videos about them that you're likely to enjoy. And secondly, Warhorse Studios has already sort of addressed this historical issue with the second game, particularly with a cutscene that is missable, but is arguably the best part of the entire game. This cutscene features a long chat with Marquard von Aulitz, and if I'm able, I will upload the full scene to this channel on the same day that I upload this video, so you can check it out if you're interested. I definitely recommend it, and I think it does a great job of challenging Henry's simplistic and idealistic view of the struggle between Sigismund and Wenceslaus. But with that being said, I want to get right down to it. So, in short, the game is made from a Czech-centric point of view, and therefore, narratively speaking, all of the things that I'm going to discuss in this video are not inherently flaws or even inaccuracies, in so much as they are mostly the personal opinions of the Czech people. As they say, history is written by the victors. Well, that's all well and good, but in the modern age, history is written by whomever wants to write it, and repeat it often enough that people will start to believe it. This is where you get the European fallacy that the United States wasn't instrumental in winning World War II. For anyone with an elementary understanding of the Second World War, this is an absolutely insane statement. But little by little, year after year, enough people have become convinced that this is the case, and even in countries which were overwhelmed and conquered by Germany in World War II, you have people insisting that the Americans only showed up once the war was already won. And that was a lot more recent than the topic of today's video, so keep in mind how the presenter of a historical topic has tremendous influence over how the people and events therein can be perceived by the uneducated. This video's thesis is simple, and I'm not breaking new ground with any cutting-edge research. In simple terms, Wenceslaus IV was a weak and ineffectual ruler whose incompetence, laziness, and tendency towards excess caused countless problems including war, chaos, and mass death within his domains. And Sigismund, inversely, was a just ruler who promoted order, stability, and the improvement of life for all those whom he was responsible for. The legacy is clear. Wenceslaus never had any great renaissance. He spends his time on the throne squandering what was left to him. Through his indecisive rule and weak fortitude, he allowed the nobility to whittle away at royal authority, and lost his crown as King of the Romans, essentially the German throne, and was never even crowned as Holy Roman Emperor, despite the fact that his election, as such, was secured for him by his father Charles before his death. Wenceslaus IV was inarguably a horrible king. The chaos and lawlessness in Bohemia was in no small part directly his fault. He did not want to lead or carry the responsibilities of being king, much less emperor. But he also did not want to give up the luxuries and trappings of wealth and power, so he surrounded himself with young knights, lesser nobles, and all forms of sycophants that would owe their power, wealth, and offices to just him. This is not an uncommon move for kings, especially weak and ineffectual ones, but it led to incompetence at the highest levels, and caused more problems between the royalty and the nobility than it could have possibly been expected to solve. I won't get into the personal accusations leveled at Wenceslaus, as they are unsubstantiated and possibly spurious in nature, but suffice it to say, no one alive at the time would accuse him of being a good Christian man if half of what is said about him and his personal life is true. Now, the game does touch on this. In the cutscene that I mentioned before featuring von Aulitz, one of the more famous stories of Wenceslaus's depravity is retold. To keep it short, there is an accusation that Wenceslaus fed his own wife to his hunting dogs, and while this sounds horrible at face value, keep in mind that he did have a reputation as a drunken whoremonger, so it probably shouldn't be that wild to consider. Again, I am unaware of any historical evidence for these claims, but stories like this are unlikely to be chronicled while a ruling king is sitting his throne, and afterwards, who would bother to take the time to besmirch a dead king? Now, the point of this video is not to do full biographies of Wenceslaus IV and Sigismund of Luxembourg, so if it seems like I'm breezing through events at a very high level, then don't worry, it is intentional. If you want biographies on both of them, you can check out the videos that I made years ago about both of them, which I will link in the description. But suffice it to say, even the games themselves do not attempt to paint Wenceslaus as the perfect ruler. We do see blind loyalty and obedience from Henry, our POV character, but he has no formal formal education and was just recently introduced to the world of knights, nobility, and dynastic succession struggles. So we should frame everything he says, thinks, and pursues based on the simple understanding that his introduction was Sigismund's army burning his home to the ground, and his parents dying as a result of this. From a narrative point of view, Henry doesn't really need more than that. This guy burned down my home, killed my parents, and a lot of my friends and neighbors. He's a bad guy. That is a perfectly reasonable emotional response, but as we all know, war is a nasty business. Henry doesn't consider the fact that Sigismund did not just invade. He was a serious contender to the throne who was working to defend Europe from Ottoman invasion and was invited to Bohemia by an alliance of the most powerful noble houses there, including Margrave Jobst, both his and Wenceslaus's cousin, to take the throne, because none of them had faith in Wenceslaus to rule. The chaos in Bohemia did not start with Sigismund's invasion. It started with Wenceslaus's weak rule. Sigismund didn't burn Skalitz to the ground for fun. At this point, historically, he was broke. He knew that adding Bohemia to his sphere of control would help his power grow and make him more effectual as a bastion of defense against the Ottoman invasion. So when invited in and promised the support of the nobility, he would be a fool not to go to Bohemia. However, his wealth was exhausted by the failed Nicopolis campaign, again defending Europe from the Ottoman invasion, where through no fault of his own, and once again the fault of mostly the French, the crusade failed, and Sigismund barely escaped with his life. This meant that he had to rely primarily on Cuman mercenaries who lived within Hungary already. The Hungarian nobility was by and large not willing to work for plunder, but the Cumans were. So Sigismund needed to sack Skalitz for 3 reasons. One of which was it was the seat of power of one of Wenceslaus's high-ranking military officials, Radzig Kobyla, and therefore it was a military target. Secondly, he needed the silver from the mines to fund his campaign, and thirdly, he needed to pay his Cumans, and the plunder from Skalitz, excluding the silver, was how he would do that. So as pointless as it is to say to someone who has lost everything in war, the attack on Skalitz was not personal, or done out of brutality. It was a standard military move for the time. The reason I say all of this is simply to make sure anyone watching this understands that I fully understand why the game's protagonist hates Markvart von Aulitz and Sigismund so much. And I'm not saying that it's a flaw. I'm saying that you, as the player, should understand that Sigismund was not a mustache-twirling villain. He did what he did out of practicality. We've established that war is a nasty business. And this was war. It's also important to note that Sigismund did not orchestrate the events that led to Wenceslaus's imprisonment. That was the Bohemian nobility, led by Jobst of Moravia. So literally, none of the chaos leading up to the invasion of Bohemia was Sigismund's fault. Moving on, I do want to briefly talk about a few historical facts that we do have about Sigismund that led me to the opinion I have about him, which is that he was, in fact, one of the greatest rulers the region had ever seen, as well as one of the best Holy Roman emperors, and is largely responsible for the survival of Christian Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries, starting with the Crusade of Nicopolis. If you have never studied this crusade, and I would forgive you for not being familiar with it, you might only remember what was mentioned about it in the game, which is that essentially it was a military boondoggle and Sigismund was defeated at the Battle of Nicopolis. Technically those things are true, and I will link another video in the description that I did a while back about this battle that I invite you to watch if you'd like to learn more. However, the battle was not some vanity project for Sigismund or an attempt to gain riches or lands. It was a crusade that was an attempt to stop or at least slow down the Ottoman invasion of Europe. The Ottoman Empire had been expanding for centuries at this point, conquering more and more Christian lands, putting the people there to the sword, and replacing it with a Muslim caliphate. Same old story that led to nearly every single crusade, come to think of it. Sigismund, as a defender of Christianity and Western Europe as a whole, as well as the ruler of a kingdom whose borders were getting awfully close to the Ottoman Empire, invested nearly all of his wealth and military power into this crusade to stop the Ottoman advance. And it likely would have been successful if not for history's great spoilers, the French, who shockingly, and I'm saying that facetiously, made a tactical blunder based on pride, arrogance, and the extremely misplaced belief of the superiority of French knights. I know, crazy to hear that, but it's true. Again, if you'd like to learn more about that battle, check out my video down below. All of this is to say, despite the outcome, the Nicopolis Crusade was an objectively good thing for Christian Europe, and Sigismund putting all his eggs in that basket may seem foolish with hindsight, but it shows how dedicated he was to ruling ruling and protecting Christendom, which included Bohemia. If any of the other rulers involved in the region had even a fraction of his dedication, the crusade likely wouldn't have failed, and the Ottoman advance might have not only been stopped, but possibly turned on its face. So I believe this campaign, though failed, is a great sign of Sigismund's worth as a king and a ruler. The next thing I'd like to briefly touch on is his foundation of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order of knights pulled from only high levels of royalty, nobility, and the aristocracy, with the stated goal of defending Christendom from the enemies of Christ, namely the Ottomans. This order is actually really interesting, and I may do a full video about them, but in short, it was inspired by the Order of St. George and had the goal of uniting strong, faithful defenders of Europe against the Ottoman invasion. And it saw success in doing so, namely in Wallachia, Hungary, Serbia, and Romania, even long after the death of Sigismund. This is a legacy that few can compete with, and once again, shows Sigismund's willingness to put great effort and resources into something that he will not directly profit from. The order was founded as a protectorate, and an attempt to found a better defensive alliance than the sloppy and weak alliances that had previously caused the failure of nearly every crusade in history. Then of course we have the Council of Constance. Sigismund convened this ecumenical council, which, it should be noted, was not a common thing to happen, as he was a secular ruler. At the time he held several thrones, including King of the Romans, again, this was the title for the King of Germany at the time, which he attained in 1410 by election. However, he was not the Holy Roman Emperor, so the fact that he was able to successfully convene this council is actually very impressive, and speaks to his authority and the respect the continent and the church had for him at the time. The Council of Constance, to put it simply, was designed to end the Papal Schism, which is another giant reason for the instability and chaos in the Holy Roman Empire at this time. Yet again, this is a complicated topic which I don't have time for here, so yet again, I'll link a video I made previously about it in the description. But in short, the Papal Schism was a period of time where there were two people claiming to be the one true pope. There was one in Rome and one in Avignon, France. I'll let you guess which one was the real pope. The Council of Constance was called to settle this issue as it was tearing Christian Europe apart, and it succeeded. At the end of the council, the schism was over, at least for all intents and purposes, and much of the problems that it had caused, and that had caused the schism initially, had been addressed. This is another victory that we can lay at Sigismund's feet. The only controversy that comes out of this council is the execution of Jan Hus, another topic I have previously made a video about. Sigismund invited him and offered him his protection if he attended. Jan Hus attended, was arrested, and found guilty of heresy, and then burnt at the stake. There is debate as to whether this was Sigismund's plan, or if it was done in spite of him, but either way, it did happen, and this leads us to the remainder of Sigismund's historical struggles. We are, of course, now talking about the Hussite Wars. And now, not to sound like a broken record, but I previously did a two-part episode about the Hussite Wars, and that was already extremely compressed, so I'll link those in the description as well. And if you want more info, I invite you to check them out. But the Hussite Wars were a series of conflicts that happened between 1419 and 1434. They were fought mostly within the Kingdom of Bohemia between several factions of religious groups who all purported to follow the teachings of Jan Hus, but were in no means monolithic, and a group of nobles called the League of Lords, which was led by, you guessed it, King Sigismund. Now, the Hussite Wars are super messy because of all the different Hussite factions and the shifting allegiances of various nobles, but in the end, a moderate solution was found. Through diplomacy and negotiation, and another church council, this time the Council of Basel, the wars were ended, the Utrechtist faction of the Hussites were granted their religious freedom, and the Catholic Church even adopted some of the reform that they wanted. That was deemed not to be heretical. Sigismund was now fully accepted as the rightful King of Bohemia, as well as all of his other thrones, including at this time the title of Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Despite a long and bloody series of conflicts with the Hussites, and getting soundly defeated multiple times by military visionary Jan Žižka, King Sigismund was able to find a diplomatic solution to the civil war, and reunite the kingdom instead of allowing it all to crumble. I struggle to imagine the outcome being anything remotely similar if Wenceslaus had lived long enough enough to see these events. Suffice it to say, despite Henry's loyalty to Wenceslas IV, he was never a good king in any meaningful way. Sigismund was no more brutal than any other royal at the time, and had an overwhelmingly positive impact on the lands and therefore the people that he ruled, as well as being very important to the overall survival of Europe in the long run, in the face of Ottoman invasion and a devastating schism within the church. So not only is it a mischaracterization to say that Sigismund was a villain, but it is an amazing disservice to historical accuracy to not show that in the end, he saved Bohemia from themselves and enemies, foreign and domestic, multiple times. But that's where I'll leave it off for today, since this video is already getting pretty long. Again, all those links are in the description if you're interested in learning more about any of the topics I talked about today. I definitely recommend you give them all a listen. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.